Hi, everybody. Welcome to Think BRICS, your compass to an emerging multipolar world. I am super excited to have Alex Krainer here for a really interesting discussion about the role of energy and markets in our vast and tumultuous geopolitical world. Alex, it's so nice to finally get to meet you.
Thank you for having me, Ben. Good to join you today.
Thank you. So, sorry about that. Hey. So, for people who are first viewers of this channel, I want to kind of dig into your background and why it's so relevant in the news today, especially concerning BRICS. What do you think is the most important? What do you think is the most important way of addressing uncertainty in um, markets?
Okay, so that's a very broad question, and I think that it would depend on what your role in the market is. What is your relationship to the markets? There's all kinds of people out there. There's, endowment managers. There's day traders. There's your 401k retirees. It depends on who you are. There's hedgers, people who have significant exposure to prices of commodities or currencies, or exposure to interest rates. So it'll depend. But one thing that, as a market professional, I have learned very early on in my career is that there's no way around uncertainty. Uncertainty is the medium in which we act, basically, and we have to reckon with it in one way or another. Of course, you also have the choice to not participate, and that's a legitimate choice. But in that case, you know that your the purchasing power of your savings, of your investment portfolio, is slowly being eaten away by inflation, and you can even calculate, based on what the inflation is, how long it'll take for your purchasing power to get to zero. You know that if you live on a fixed amount of money every year, your living expenses tend to be a little bit higher. So the only, unfortunately, in the system that we're in, the only way to offset this is to take risks and to try to generate investment returns. That is the unfortunate state of things, because it really shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. The system was set up in a certain way. Our money is fiat. We don't earn gold pieces or silver pieces, and this is simply the reality that we have to deal with. And as they say, who was it? I think one of those early founding fathers in the United States, maybe Alexander Hamilton, who said that the power over a man's purse is the power over his the power over a man's purse is a power over his liberty, or something to that effect.
Right. And that's and I completely agree that the fact that uncertainty is not even discussed really in models of economic growth or even the standards of living for people like yourself and I, depending on where you live, is quite shocking. I mean, we really see a lot of ridiculous assumptions about, like you said, what kind of people we are, how far we're looking into the future, perhaps, and what our mindset is when there is, market volatility, really. And I think with Trump's tariffs recently, we really have seen that in action. But why do you think that commodities and like oil in particular is such a driver for a lot of other crucial price trends?
Well, because energy, kind of like labor, is the lifeblood of the economy. It's practically in everything. It underpins transportation, production. It's essential to the productivity of human labor. So it's almost in every product, and in every it's built into every product and every service that is exchanged in the economy. So if the energy is cheap and abundant, then that's easy sailing for the economy. If it becomes scarce and expensive, then that's headwinds. And we see that on the case of Europe, which has shot itself in the face with sanctions against Russia. And then, in addition, some mysterious somebody blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. So that made things a whole lot worse. And we see that European economies are basically in a gradual state of collapse. Germany, which has been one of the world's main industrial powerhouses, is being rapidly deindustrialized, and it's losing its status as the world's most advanced economy. And this is largely to do with energy, and it's not just it's almost like they created a perfect storm for themselves. It's not just uh, Russia sanctions and the Nord Stream pipelines. It's also that they've been completely committed to these cockamamie net zero policies, that they are they want to power their economies with supposedly clean, sustainable sources of energy. Solar panels and windmills. But this is proving to have been a very bad idea. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, go ahead.
No, there's a saying that capital without energy is a statue, and labor without energy is a corpse.
Yeah,
Energy is
exactly.
essential. It's essential in the not just the production of the backbone of the economy, but also the livelihoods that you and I depend on. You know, and we see that with and we can kind of look at two sides here. The like kind of the United States, for example, has an interstate highway system, which is nice in theory, and you can compare it to something like high speed rail that they have in China. But the only sources they're really using are oil and liquefied natural gas to a certain extent. Meanwhile, China has diversified diversified away from solely coal and things of that nature to nuclear, hydropower and things of that nature. And you can see the effect on not just living standards, but also purchasing power parity, where millions of people have been taken out of poverty in China over the last few years, or over the last 20 years or so. And meanwhile, in the United States, it's that much worse. If we're talking about oil and all you're using for your transportation system, heating and cooling is on oil, then it becomes that much more apparent and it feeds into itself. Everyone knows how important it is, and it becomes that much more important. Why do you think that having a diverse sources of energy can help with dealing with market shocks? Really,
Well, diversification is the best way to reduce your risk, especially from external shocks. So, you know, the Chinese, as you rightly said, they have diversified their energy production. So they're using oil and gas, and they're still heavily reliant on coal. And then they invested heavily into nuclear energy, and they're also investing heavily in the development of battery technology. And so that they're keeping their economic system humming on the systems and technologies that have been absolved, that have been mastered, uh, and then they're diversifying into newer things. We just now heard that they've recently put into operation a first tungsten
yep.
generator that has been running continuously for some time, for some days, which is a breakthrough. it's not a new technology, but it's been experimental in the West, and then Western nations have not chosen to pursue this energy because it's um, it's much more abundant than uranium. And so I think that maybe the logic is that it would be more difficult to control. So if like if everybody has a little modular nuclear reactor in their neighborhood that they can run, or run them privately, then what do you need big utilities for, right?
Yep.
So we don't want people to be sovereign and independent and free. We want them to be dependent on the big systems that we build. So maybe that's why in the West they walked away from this, but China has chosen to pursue it. And I was also amazed. Apparently, this is true, that they have designed a battery for cell phones that can run for 50 years. That's quite insane. Imagine if
That's insane.
they developed similar types of batteries for cars, for example.
They came out with a lithium battery that can charge your car in 5 minutes.
Yes,
5 minutes.
yes,
That's insane. And you have Tesla cars that while they can't get to the nearest charging station while their wildfires are completely consuming their livelihood. It's just such a
yeah.
stark, unfortunate contrast. And to your point about wanting people to be dependent on those systems, I think you bring up a really good point, and we can kind of see it play out with, like you're talking about, Ukraine, and also right now with the United States and Iran. Um, right now, or well, it really hasn't been right now, but people have speculated that if ever the United States were to actually launch an attack, that oil prices could shoot up to over $135 a barrel, which is which is double what it is right now. Why do you think the United States has gone out of its way to make sure um, countries like Iran and China and Russia have these kind of unstable events that could affect their energy production?
I'm sorry, Ben. I didn't understand the question. You mean that the United
Sorry.
States is concerned that China, Russia, and Iran have
Yeah, sorry. I That's my fault. So I think we see that we understand that the energy production is the bloodline of economic development, and for all of us. And I think we also see that there are those with, we'll call it influence, especially within kind of the Western style states and what have you, that want to they do not want these nations to find new sources of energy, secure refinement materials for their own production networks, establish transportation networks for that. Um, why do you think that that's as important as it is? I suppose.
Well, I think that it's because in the West we have this illusion of democracy, or democracy delusion, but in reality, Western powers are all ruled by hereditary oligarchies that are, I think, clustered around the banking cartels, and they want to keep the whole rest of the world in dependent on them. They want to preserve their global hegemony and to entrench it so that it's irreversible. This is the idea of a unipolar order, of the projects for the new American century, the Great Reset. It's all kind of Western centric, where the West holds all the all the cards, all the keys to future development. And so, you to be in this position, you have to have kind of the global monopoly on credit creation, on advanced technologies, and on advanced weaponry. And so, they would prefer that we all go by whatever the West dictates. So if they decide it's going to be solar and wind power, then everybody better fall into line, and not only just any old way, but you noticed when they started this process of transitioning, and it's part of the problem is that you see what the Chinese are doing. I'm jumping a little bit all over the place, but I'll get back to the point. What the Chinese are doing have been doing is they've kept the technologies that are mastered and reliable intact, and then they built on top. They diversified from that. So that's your foundation. You don't destroy the foundation and then transition to something completely new. Whereas the Europeans have decided, we destroy the foundation, we do away with what we had before, and we start transitioning to something completely new and untested. So that's why you have all these problems that would perhaps be all ironed out, but it takes a lot of time, for because it's not just to develop a car. You need a whole infrastructure about how you're going to distribute the pieces, the service stations, the charging stations. You practically need to overhaul the power grid to make sure that uh, there's charging stations everywhere where the traffic is going to go. And where's the traffic going to go? You're going to have maybe new industrial centers, new centers of gravity where population is going to, that's these are all problems that need to be resolved, and they cannot be resolved overnight. The Chinese have moved gradually, not away from what they have, but in addition. They added more things, and then over long periods of time, if they develop some kind of spectacular advancement with alternative energy sources, then maybe it'll be safe and uh, easy to move away from the fossil fuel. And anyway, the what the Europeans have done, well, the Americans as well, it's the Western powers in general, they have practically, uh, from top down, dictated not only, oh, we're going to go into solar and wind. You'll see that all the windmills everywhere are the same design.
Right.
They didn't say, let's see how we can best develop wind power. So why don't we allow people uh, free reign to develop something that makes sense? They developed deliberately these ginormous, gigantic windmills that are only produced by a handful of these big corporations that live um, off of state subsidies that are completely unfeasible without state subsidies. Whereas we've seen in history that human ingenuity has already used wind power for centuries, and people have designed systems uh, that they know how to run, that they know how to build, that they know how to maintain. You had windmills for producing flour. You had in Greece windmills to pump water. I mean, like hundreds of them that were produced from local material, with local labor, with local expertise. And rather than allowing the a bottom up process to kind of find the direction towards the optimal solution, something that's cheap, effective, easy to maintain, inexpensive to purchase, and inexpensive to own. They kind of imposed top down this one model, and everybody has to do that. And then it goes top down, forcing governments to adopt programs to build these monstrosities everywhere, and they're all the same. And then the evolution is only the size. They build them this size, and then they say, like, oh well, we can build them even bigger, so they made them a little bit bigger. But they're difficult to maintain, they're very expensive. They did not think one moment about disposal when they finally reach their useful life, the end of their useful life. So now you have a massive environmental problem with those windmills. So that's the problem. And then, in order for the West to retain their hegemony over everybody else, they wanted to force those same models, those same ideas on everybody else. And so obviously, you don't want the Chinese to develop their own technologies and to be autonomous. You don't want the Russians, you don't want anybody. You want everybody to always be dependent on you for technologies, for solutions, for funding, for arming. That's the unipolar global order where the empire is surrounded by vassals and takes life and death decisions over everybody. So I think that we've overcome that, not everywhere, but I think it's a rising tide that cannot be stopped now.
Yeah, and I find something really interesting about um, you said this top down versus bottom up approach. And what uh, I think something that what often gets overlooked is information, access to information, transparency of information, and obviously how that feeds into the system, i.e., you and I, and in other market mechanisms and things of that nature. When you see uh, BRICS, a main tenet of it is establishing cooperation on energy production, diversification, models to transport different sources of energy, obviously with different trading partners. But with establishing those connections also comes the local expertise, like you were mentioning, of that they could promote with the cultural exchange. And learning from others makes the system more robust and makes it smarter and more adaptive because you are taking the perspectives of everyone and their lifestyle and their approach to solving the problem, really. So I guess what I'm I guess what I'm curious about for your perspective is what can BRICS do really to um, promote this energy cooperation while keeping in mind the interests of each respective country here.
Well, I think that in the way they're doing it, they're trying to do it. We see that Russia and China are bringing their nuclear technology to many underdeveloped countries because this is extremely important. It's very difficult for a country to be developed when they don't have access to electricity. The Western powers have kept them deliberately in the dark, because the Western model has been to keep them impoverished so that they export all their resources, their commodities, uh, to a handful of foreign buyers who then dictate the price. And then if they have energy and electricity abundantly in their own countries, they can begin to develop their own economies, and then they will absorb some of those commodities at home. And the Chinese, it seems to me that they positively want this because in the same way that they have lifted 850 million Chinese out of poverty, it seems to me that they want to lift billions in the global south out of poverty. Why? Because they have positioned themselves as a global manufacturing hub, and they want them to be affluent consumers of their products. They want that exchange, and so they want prosperous nations as trading partners, whereas Western powers want very weak, very impoverished nations as trading partners because they want to buy their commodities at rock bottom prices that the Western powers dictate. And so it's a clash of two systems, really. But I think that obviously the Chinese model is, and it's not really the Chinese model. It should be properly called the American system because it has already been adopted by the United States when it became independent, and you have Henry Carey, who was Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, who wrote extensively about this in his book, The Harmony of Interests. And he exactly contrasts this American system of political economy with the British system of free trade. Well, today, the West has largely adopted the British system of free trade. It's like a monoculture, it's the unquestioned paradigm on which we are building our world. Uh, Whereas the Chinese and the Russians are doing something completely different. And so I think that the development of new technologies and these, modular nuclear reactors and possibly in the future tungsten reactors and who knows what else is going to be shared with the world. Maybe we'll have to buy it, but it you need to have access to energy in order to develop your economy. The,
Exactly.
the West has colonized the global South for 2 centuries, and they're very underdeveloped. They're very poor, and they're drowning in debt. Whereas the Chinese are applying the same approach with which they have lifted 850 million of their own citizens out of poverty. I know of a concrete example. I was in a conference a few years ago, and there were a lot of representatives of African countries there, and also from representatives from Yemen. And I spoke with a young man from Yemen who told me how the Chinese built a very large port in Yemen, and the deal was that the Chinese told them, "We will build this port for you." I think they spent something like $500 million on it. We will build this port for you completely, and you don't need to pay us back anything for 20 years. This will help your economy develop, and once your economy is developed and prosperous, then you will be able to pay us back, and at that point, you will pay us back. But for now, it's just there to help you develop your economy. So that's the approach. And a number of these, I was very curious about this, and in the breaks during this conference, I really made it a point to ask a number of people what's going on in Africa. And to a person, they all told me that since the Chinese came there, for the first time, people are starting to believe that the lives of their children are going to be better than their lives, that they're starting to perceive their societies moving in the right direction, that things are actually improving. And they said that the Chinese, uh, the people that China sends there, that they treat them with respect, that they're helping them along. Um, Very very sharp contrast with what the British and the French were doing there, because they would bring them equipment, and then if they broke the equipment, it all went on their tab. It all increased their debt. It says that the Chinese send us tractors. The tractors break down immediately. They're sending engineers. They're sending parts. They're helping us repair them. They're teaching us how to repair them, and it's not plunging us deeper and deeper into debt. And I'm, just to make sure, I've no, I have, I'm, I'm telling you what I have observed. This is not me kind of rooting for China and
No,
against the United States. This is
no.
just simply, it's a clash between two systems of governance. And as I told you, the the contrast between these two systems was already articulated almost 200 years ago. And the United States actually emerged as a reaction to this European system. The United States was a rebellion against, the United States became a power because they rejected this European system, and they became an independent and sovereign power. And they rose to prominence by applying this American system of political economy, that is, allocating credit to productive uses, to development of infrastructure and industrialization, and allocation of credit to small and medium-sized enterprises, the exact ones that would be the engines of innovation. So if you wanted to, have better energy systems, you would expect them to emerge from the ingenuity of a lot of little people, not from Klaus Schwab's head.
Exactly. Exactly. You make such a great point. And it is, and I completely agree with you. When we contrast these systems, we know that it is the governance structure, not the people that they are governed under. There's a difference between someone that uses a zero sum strategy where they think I win or therefore you lose, or more mutually beneficial systems where you get rich, I get rich. And that's how it has worked for, since humans have really developed over time. And having access to energy to establish a foundation for economic growth is what BRICS is trying to establish across Africa in particular, because they don't have the infrastructure yet. They need to develop the transportation systems around their cities so they can continuously have the energy so they can build these projects up. And we see here with, again, two different systems. Like here, we're assuming that we can make, like debt has no impact on growth, really. Like ridiculous assumptions on, the what credit should be used for more financialization type products, or for more industrialization, joint ventures and projects to make the foundation of your economy as stable and as robust as possible. And the importance of people like you and I talking about this in this forum is that we have completely different lifestyles, perspectives, ideas, and philosophies. And that's the point, and that's where innovation and creativity emerge. It comes from establishing a means of learning from people and understanding how they take from their mindset to, like you say, solve a different problem, help make a more efficient truck line, really, uh, a different source of energy and what have you. So I want to see if I can show you a picture. This is, so when we're talking about the American political economy and what you said about Abraham Lincoln's, he was his trade minister. Is that correct?
I think economic advisor. His name was Henry Carey.
Thank you. Yeah, and um, the founding, like the earliest economists, really attributed wealth to the sun, really, or to because it provided the opportunity for agriculture to develop, for land to grow and become fertile, and what have you. So we see that that how I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but for countries to adopt a kind of system of robust innovation coming from people of all walks of life, of different industries and everything like that, where do you think the American or the British system, how can we transition to something that is more prosperous and less wasteful than what we are currently doing so far?
I think that one really important thing is to reform the banking system. Because now for the last 30 years or so, or maybe longer, the American banking system has been gradually consolidating. So, going from tens of thousands of local, regional, state banks, it's moving more and more in favor of five or six mega banks, and we know that uh, small local banks tend to fund small local enterprise, whereas large mega banks tend to favor and fund large mega enterprises. And so, small and medium size businesses are finding it much, much harder to obtain funding at anything close to competitive terms. The country that had perhaps the best developed banking system in the world was Germany, which is what made Germany the world's leading exporting superpower. And I think that it's only been in the last 10 years, relatively recently, that China overtook Germany as an exporter. Germany was really world's number one. And, this wasn't, we all know about BMWs and Mercedes and things like this, which are very, very visible things. But Germany had the world's largest number of so-called market champions. I think that's the term. And what this term means is companies that occupy the first, second, or third place in terms of market share globally. Germany had 1,200 of them. Okay, the very, very distant second was the United States with about, I think, 350 or so. So these data points are a few years old, but basically what happens is that you have in Germany you had thousands of local and regional banks who knew businesses in their towns and villages and regions very, very intimately. 70% of all these banks were non-profit enterprises. So they were not for-profit institutions that simply supported local businesses as almost as a public utility, and they provided them funding at very, very favorable rate, including not infrequently 100-year loans.
Wow.
So imagine you're an entrepreneur and you feel that you can bring some product to the market, and you need $1 million, and the local bank says, okay, let's see if you can pull this off, and they decide that you can, and they give you $1 million, and you're off and you start building your business. And then since you're not pressed to turn out to repay this debt in 5 years, in 10 years, and the bank will not yank that line of credit from you on short notice, that means that you have a lot of maneuvering space to be developing your business. And then these banks would act also as financial advisors. They would come into the company, they would advise them about how to structure their finances, and make them more efficient. And then you in the next generation, I don't know, if you started a chemical company, maybe your children would go and study chemistry and learn new things and come back and refine your processes and upgrade your technologies and bring innovations. So over you have multi-generational businesses that and you had hundreds of them, 1,200 of them, which were global champions because they have advanced whatever widgets they were producing to the point where they were the best and most efficient at it in the world. And this is why Germany was the world's leading exporter, because these are things that you've never heard of. It's not necessarily products that you and I would buy in the street, but maybe parts for apparel industry machines, or for hospitals, or whatever.
Mhm.
And so the economy was very diverse. It was technologically very advanced. It was very efficient. It was very, very well run. It was very abundantly supported by the banking system in terms of funding. And so German economy was a big global success. Well, until all these things happened, where Klaus Schwab and those people decided that they needed a great reset, and the ECB started simply culling small banks by their thousands. I think in the last few years across Europe, 6,000 banks have been either either put out of business or absorbed into larger systems. What you had in Germany, and the same basic model was applied in China, And I think that this is what you had in the United States last century when the United States suddenly emerged as this global power. Is you had a a, a large scale bottom up development that wasn't constrained to quarterly profits. It had, you had multi generational development process that was continuous. And so this is where you get advancements. This is where you get competitive advantage, innovation, and all this. But it's always bottom up because, you know, you can't have a central committee, Politburo, deciding you will adopt these technologies. It's very often very tied to local know-how. To, if you have a place where there's plenty of wind, well, people are clever. They will invent ways to harness wind power. If you're somewhere where there's plenty of sun, they will invent they will advance solar power, maybe. But when you have a central committee, top down, like Soviet style management system, then you have absurdities that like they place these wind farms where there's hardly any winds. They cover the landscape with solar panels, and then they decide, oh, by the way, we're going to start this project of dimming the sun because of global warming. So like they invested, who knows, billions upon billions into solar panels, and now they're going to dim the sun on top of that. These are the kind of absurdities that you get with this top down process, because somehow uh, by some mysterious process of accretion, you always get people like Ursula von der Leyen and Klaus Schwab who float up on top, who are ideologues but have never built anything in their lives, anything of any use to society, and never had to compete in the marketplace, never had to innovate. And so I think that this is the answer to your question. I think that the maybe the critical step is to reform the banking system so that you level the playing field, so that people can start small local banks and fund small local businesses and help them advance, help them give them the maneuvering space to develop their businesses, to educate their children and new generations, and so forth. And another thing that you get with family-owned businesses is that you have very strong commitment to the future of the business. Whereas large corporation, you hit a bad year, and they downsize, they let people go, they move the whole thing to China or somewhere else, and they leave wasteland behind them.
Right. And I think that, like you said, when, obviously, when people are going to harness the sun if you're in the desert, clearly. And I think I just have one more question before we get to closing. And I want to pin it to, while we were talking about, um, you know, the recent turmoil between the United States and Iran, with Russia and Ukraine and the EU. We see that it's kind of those in that BRICS bloc versus not so. But with Ethiopia recently constructing a dam that will be blocking water from the Nile River to Egypt, it's becoming a very hotly contested discussion, because the dam is needed for Ethiopia so that they can harness, their water and grow their agriculture and feed their people. But it's also going to have a very clear downside to the Egyptian lifestyle, because of how much they rely on the Nile for, and how much they import rice and everything like that. I guess so. My last question is, do you think that do you think that uh, BRICS, or maybe not even necessarily BRICS per se, but should there be a way to negotiate on these sort of energy related conflicts? Because we can really see that a lot of these conflicts are because of energy, the access to energy, the potential of this energy could have on whomever it tries, whoever it will benefit.
Well, I think that you're always going to have conflicts. You're always going to have rivalry. So you need mechanisms of resolution, and the conflicts will often be over resources. But wars are always the most expensive way of resolving conflicts. And yes, if Ethiopia building the dam on the Nile is a problem, but the Egyptians already built a dam at Aswan, and they've already kind of destabilized the how do you call it, the flood cycles
Yeah,
that they traditionally had, which were a problem. But they also kept the Nile River Valley phenomenally fertile. And okay, they don't have crocodiles anymore downstream from Aswan, but it came at a cost as well. What is exactly going to be the effect of Ethiopia's dam? I don't know. It's not my field of expertise, so I don't know if there's a way to manage a dam so that um, you can compromise that you achieve your own objectives in large part, but you don't harm the people living downstreams. If that can be achieved, I don't know if it's black or white. I genuinely am ignorant about how these things work, but obviously you need ways of conflict resolution, and uh, that's between nations. And at a higher level, if the nations can't work it out, there should be certain commitment to international law between nations, and then a certain way of arbitrating these conflicts. And then the measure of last resort is a military conflict. Somebody goes and blows up the dam that offends them. But I don't know if that's a solution to anything at all.
yeah. I think as long as there are, as long as people communicate, there's always room for negotiation. Obviously, people or other countries have their own interests ahead, but in the end, you know, peace can work out. There are negotiations are always possible. There's always a way to facilitate it, regardless if you're in BRICS or not. Regardless of BRICS is involved in negotiations or not. There's always room for communication and conflict resolution, especially for things as incredibly important as energy and however we mean to use that energy.
Correct.
So I really want to thank you, Alex, for joining us for today's discussion. I know we covered a lot of topics, but it honestly was really great to understand your expertise and understand your perspective on all of these evolving dynamics because they're not going to go away. And I really want to thank everyone here for watching this Think Bricks interview. You can subscribe and follow the links in the description below, and we will be sure to include Alex's website as well as his publications and sources of social media, so you can read and follow his updates. I personally love his Substack. I would gladly, I would you have to read his Substack once we're done here. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Ben. That's very kind of you. It was good to join you today, and warm greetings to everyone out there.